Welcome to the Level Up Career Playbook. I am your host, Brian Bell. I am so excited to have you join for another episode, another deep dive into the strategies, the skills, the stories that help professionals like me and you thrive in our careers. This podcast is about uncovering what the best of the best do to master their craft, and I would love to share those insights with all of you. Today, I am thrilled. I am excited to introduce and welcome my friend and a great person, just in general, Bali Balasubraniam, better known as Bali. It's a little bit easier to say. Bali is an absolute powerhouse in IT applications and enterprise management. He's a powerhouse in all the things behind the scenes that you don't really know and you take for granted when you go to work every day. He's got over 20 years of experience transforming businesses, transforming their processes, enabling cross-functional alignment, and elevating the experience that all of us, especially in the tech world, experience every day, and all these different tools that somehow seamlessly work. There's people behind the scenes, and people like Bali are the reason why we're able to be so productive. It's because of people literally like Bali that all of the things we're able to do, this podcast, for example, that happened because of people like Bali. Bali has worked with some of the most innovative companies. I won't list all of them, but I will say I worked with them at one. I was his actual business partner, became really good friends from that, and I saw how he operated, and I knew I had to have him as one of our guests because he's one of the best people, just in IT, but in general, and how he shows up at work. So if you ever wondered, what does IT do? How do IT leaders approach scaling? How do they approach technology? How do they approach collaboration and making it seamless? How do they approach driving change? Because a lot of what they do is really change management of taking one huge system and changing it to another. Bali is the person to learn from. Of course, I want to be selfish and explore some of the HR tools and some of the HR practices we can do better in HR to support people like Bali and the leaders like Bali so they can be successful. And to take it back to the beginning, the point of this podcast was to selfishly learn and to learn how my fellow HR professionals can be better. Bali, welcome to the Level Up Podcast. I am so excited to have you here. How are you doing?
Thanks, Brian. Happy to be a part of this journey with you. I know we have been friends, but we also talk professionally in a way that we connect personally, which is weird. The way I even say it, I think that speaks to how we have continued our journey for the last, I would say, 4 to 5 years. Great to be on board, and whatever knowledge I have, I'm more than happy to share with the audience.
I appreciate that. And I call you all the time trying to pick your brain. And so, yes, it has been a friendship, but it's also been a professional friendship on top of it, where we're exchanging how to be better at work. And so we've been doing this informally. So I appreciate you doing this formally so more people can learn. Real quick, before we get into the actual questions, I want to kind of give a breakdown. The podcast is sports related and it's powered by Mamba HR. It's a tool that my co-founder and I, Kelly Inman, we've been dreaming to build this tool, to build a better workday, to have a better HR set of tools that are seamless. You and I have discussed this quite a bit about creating a better HR tool because I wanted to pick your brain because you're one of the best people to learn from. As a reminder, the name Mamba HR, it comes from Kobe Bryant's Mamba mentality, and that's to be dedicated to the craft, not about the destination, but falling in love with the process. And so we have a few segments. They're going to be introduced throughout this podcast, and they're sports related. The first one being the pregame, Bali. So, of course, in the pregame, we're going to talk about your foundational years, your early influences, what gave you your start. So let's start from the beginning. Growing up as a youngin', what sparked your interest in tech? What sparked your interest in IT? How did you get here?
So I'll start this off with a little bit of a funny beginning. I didn't even know what the word IT meant when I started. So I was working for a product company back in India, early 90s. And somehow I landed up in US. I have no reason why I landed up in US, but I landed in US. And my very first opening, they said, you work in an IT department. At that time, we didn't have Google, it was Yahoo. So I went and searched for it. I'm like, oh, which means it's information department. But I still don't know what the meaning of it was. And it took me almost 6 months to accept the fact that there's an IT department. And then I like, okay, now that led me to the journey of what does an IT department do? So my first 6 months was headless chicken thrown into a department where I had no idea what an IT department does. That is how I started my journey. I know that sounds bad when you look at it 25 years back, but that's the reason why I ended up in IT. So not
And
that
you
somebody gave me a choice. They just said, you work here, right? And I get a paycheck. Thank
okay,
you.
well,
Pretty much it.
and that's what we all start with was the paycheck. But you wanted to be in product first? Is that what you said?
Yeah, I work for a product company. Even that, I wanted to get a job back in India. I eventually landed up in a company not knowing that it's a product company. So they said, you need to write something. I said, I will write code. And then later I realized it's actually a product. So right from day one of getting into the workforce, what I learned is it's not about what you know, how you go about knowing it and how you go about doing it is what matters. Now, if I reflect back, that's what I learned. I might not know what I'm getting into, but let me try digging through that. And I'll give you a different anecdotal evidence on this one. Since you come from the Mamba mentality school, you should watch that podcast that Kobe did maybe a year and a half before he passed away, where he said he was curious to know what the game of basketball does, right? So that made him ask 100 different questions to probably thousands of people, right? And the outcome of that was he said, the world is my dictionary. For me, everybody that I talk to, everybody that I work with, everybody that I interact with, they are my go-to people for information.
So before Mama Mentality, you were already thinking, you didn't know that you wanted to be in IT. They said, this is the job. You could have said, no, this is not for me. Let me go find something else. So what kept you driving was just the natural curiosity to learn from people. Why
Yeah.
did you give up? Why didn't you say, this is not what I signed up for?
So so the very first job was interesting. I was more of like, no, hey, first job, I get a paycheck. I can spend my own money. I'm not dependent on my parents for anything. I can spend whatever I want to, right? Then eventually, when I came to US, I applied the same mentality, like paycheck, job, went through that process. But what I also realized is 6 months into my first job, I met a lot of great people who are my peers are just one level above me. And when I hear them talk about what they do and how they solve problems, all of a sudden one day I felt my job is too boring. 6 months into the job, I'm like, so am I going to learn? Am I not going to learn? And that basically I went to my boss and said, I don't think I'm the right fit for my job. I went to my boss and told him that. He said, so what do you want to do? I said, I'm not learning. Yes, I am doing my job. I get a paycheck. I'm happy about that. I do these things. Then he says, let me put you into something. Experiment with this. See if you like this. He says, let's talk about this 6 months after. And that was the beginning of my understanding the business process. I still remember it was 1995, December 14th.
Wow, the date. And we're almost coming up on that. The question I would have there is, was there other key moments that got you to this moment to make you thrive to say, I want to learn more?
Actually, not really, because at that time, I cared very little about people. For me, it was about just getting a paycheck. So it's not about like, no, what I learned from them. So I didn't know that I need to learn from people to begin with, right? So that's how dumbed down I was. For me, I was like, somebody is going to give me a proper recipe handed over to me in a silver platter, and then I just have to make sure I convert the silver platter into a gold platter is what I thought. What I didn't realize was there was no platter. Sometimes I have to create that platter on my own, right? Which it took me 15 plus years to go through that. So the other factor, reflecting back, which I reflected back probably 15 years into my professional career, was I did my computer science engineering, and until the 15th year, I never understood what I'm using the degree for. Or I would say not 15, probably 8-ish, 8 to 15, somewhere in that. So I thought I got a degree because my parents asked me to get a degree, right? Not that I wanted to do a degree, which is probably true for most of the
Same
individuals,
here. Yeah.
right? So then when I went to look at business process problem and optimizing stuff, so I'll give you a very good example. I was asked to work in a warehouse one day. So the manager once told me, in order for you to implement something in a system, you need to know the process. Fair, right? So I said, how do I learn the process? Wrong question to ask is what I realized, but it's a great lesson for me. They said, you need to drop off these things from the truck and drop it off in a shelf like a Costco warehouse. I'm like, okay, good. Says, and you're going to do it using a forklift. So I'm like, okay, I will drive. He says, no, the compliance policy says you need to be trained for 3 hours on a forklift, and I need to certify you by an inspector within the warehouse. And once they certify you is when you are able to even put foot on the forklift. I'm like, oh, great lessons, right? So I took 3 hours of forklift driving lessons in an open space, in a receiving dock in a warehouse. And then I learned how to operate it. And I started taking things from the truck and then putting it on the shelf. I can tell you, I probably took the longest route every time to reach because I know the warehouse. I didn't know what's the best method to get there. So a few years later, we were having a friendly conversation with few of my colleagues. There's something called operation research that we learned in our engineering schools. And there, the operation research basically tells you what is the best method to get to your destination. That is exactly what I actually applied eventually. But I didn't know I applied that. Right?
And it took you a couple of years to connect the dots there?
Yep.
And nobody told you?
Nobody
Was
told
that
me.
a test to figure it out on your own and that let you know if you were
No,
ready to go or not?
it was not a test, but I had people around me who basically can relate that to what I learned, what happens in real life. Right? There's a lot of people who told me, remember when you were in engineering, you did study this subject? I'm like, yeah. Now take that subject and apply it against what you just did 6 months ago or a year ago. I actually got this as a part of my performance review.
Can
And that's
you
when I realized, okay, I did use something in my degree that I learned in a real life job.
let's dig in there? And maybe I'm putting you on the spot. What are the basic tenets of what'd you call it? The operational
Operation research. So the way, if you want to move things from a location A to B, right? What is the shortest and the fastest method to get to that destination? So for us, the warehouse was actually arranged in a specific way for us. The numbering of it, how the products are aligned from like smaller items to the bigger items. So I don't know what exists in my truck. So when I get those boxes, I need to figure out, okay, these are all small boxes or these are all big boxes. So depending on what the type of boxes, either I need to start from one end of the warehouse or from the other end of the warehouse. If I don't do that, I'm just going to drive back and forth trying to position things in. And that's exactly what an operation research does for you.
I think that's key because especially early in your career, even now, I still feel like I'm early in my career. I'm learning a lot. Your boss tells you to go do something. And if you have a pretty decent boss, they'll give you some parameters.
Yeah.
But a lot of times things are moving so fast, it's like, here's the end result, go figure it out. And we just either do exactly what they tell us, or if they give us that much detail, or we just go on autopilot and don't do the research, don't do the figuring out what am I actually doing? And so in this operational research, we can stick to the forklift example. That is when it's okay for you to ask questions, right? Versus tell me how to get there. Is that where you are now? Let's practically use this in your job even today.
Yeah. So the way I learned in my life, professional life, is there are people who have been doing this in the warehouse for a long time. They know where the products are. They know what is the fastest method. The first day, no matter what they said, I didn't listen. So I kept doing what I need to do to get to the destination. A second day, I realized, okay, I was able to complete 40% of my work on an 8-hour day. The second day, when I started listening to them a little bit, it went to 75%. And that's when I know, okay, so they are doing something right. If somebody can change my parameters of delivering things by 70%, they must be doing something right. And these are
Right.
people who have never gone to school, right? So once you learn that, then I said, okay, it's not about school. It's how you apply what you learned in your life to the daily job that makes you a better professional individual as well as a person.
Let's apply that to even now. Now you are the expert in the room. You've been doing this for quite a bit. And so people are going to be, well, actually, I should go talk to Bali because he's done it enough. He's going to know the shortcuts and the best route. Although you're the expert in the room, it would be great if you had somebody that you can go to. Are you still asking questions? I feel like you are the person that people are going to now, and there is not that expert in the room anymore for you. So how do you approach that?
So first of all, I don't consider myself an expert. I think I have access to information that I can tap into. So I kept my philosophy extremely simple. The new latest wave of AI technology that's happening, right? I'm not an expert. By no means I'm an expert on this one. But when you talk to people, when you see how others are doing the same job that you did 3 years ago in a different fashion, you learn, okay, that's a different method to do it. Some of them are due to technology, some of them are due to how the industry has evolved over time. Then you take that and say, can this be applied in my organization? So you basically figure out, you learn from others, you see whether the technology is applicable to the industry that you are a part of. Is it applicable to the organization that you are a part of? Implementation is the simplest part. Getting to the implementation is the toughest part. So that is what I do. Every one of my peers, every one of the people that I talk to, I consider them as something that I can learn from.
Around that, so you have a new technology that you need to integrate, a new app that you need to work on. It's something that maybe you haven't seen before. But you being the expert in the room, it's like, I should know exactly how to do this. How do you go about internally asking, hey, I'm not quite sure about this tool, this process, this way? Do you ask that internally in a way that doesn't lower your credibility? Or are you mostly getting and asking and learning from people outside of the workplace, your kind of your network, to make sure your credibility doesn't get shot? Or how do you approach that?
I think the credibility is not based on how much you know. The credibility is based on how you help people be successful, how you help organization be successful. My philosophy is, by asking a question in a way that I'm asking for help, doesn't compromise my credibility, right? I know only what I know because that is what has been thrown at me over a period of 25 years. So for me, if I just go and ask somebody for help, the chance of them doubting my credibility or saying no to my asking for help is almost slim to none.
Okay, that's fair.
So that is how I don't look at this as a credibility thing. I look at it as, am I willing to ask for help? Sometimes it could be my people that work for me. Sometimes it could be my peers. Sometimes it could be actually by business users. They might go to a conference and say, hey, I came across this technology, which I think we can use in a company. Nothing wrong with that. Hey, they are sharing me something because they have trust in me that I'm listening to what they are saying and make an effort to see whether that could be leveraged within our organization. Why not? Somebody is actually handing me a platter, right? Why am I going to say no to that? That is how I look at it. It's not about credibility issue at all.
Okay, that's a good call. Let's move on. I think the instrumental part was that who would have thought somebody being in your world in IT and tech, driving a forklift was really influential, and it makes sense of like, how do you actually go about doing your job versus just going on autopilot? Let's go to the second segment. This is called Power Up, and really want to get more into the actual skills and the skill building that help lead to some career milestones. So you worked at Coherent, you worked at Redis Labs. What skills have been the most instrumental and most influential in you being successful in your career?
So for me, what has helped me, what still helps me is, I think, understanding the process within every organization. Whatever you are held responsible for supporting, try to understand that. Try to see what are the other processes that it supports or the peripheral process around that. Once you know that, then see what technology you have within your organization, or do you need to go and buy something to help manage this process, right? If you relate both of them together, actually think you by just by the definition, you will add value. The philosophy I always use, and it's not true for every one of them, is you don't need to have the best technology to solve your business process problem. You need to have the right technology to solve your problem. The right technology can be anything, right? So I don't know. Right technology sometimes can be you need to put 3 human beings to do this job. Maybe it's cheaper than buying a technology to automate it. So that is the philosophy that I approach. It's also the philosophy that I apply at home many times. Let's say my dishwasher doesn't work. The first thing is we don't try replacing the dishwasher with a new dishwasher, right? We don't, right? We call the warranty company if you have one, or we try to turn it on and off. So we do a few of those things, right? Then depending on what the outcome of that is, we say, okay, do we need to look at a different dishwasher? We don't know, but we do a couple of steps before you get there. And that's something, apply the same philosophy within your business process. Are there other companies which has the same business process? Is it the same business process that somebody is trying to redo within your organization? Is it different than what is available in the industry or how we do it? If you collect your thoughts together, 80% of what business process and technology you are trying to solve is almost the same.
Yeah.
That's a different method by which you might have solved it. Maybe instead of solving it in 10 steps, you might have solved it in 4 steps in one company. In other company, you might have taken 8 different steps to solve it. But at the end of the day, a technology process, and I think the organization as a whole needs to accept the fact that there are going to be changes when you try to make a business process efficient. I think that's something that a lot of people tend to forget, but it's gone very well in the industry right now. Technology does solve problem, but technology solves problem only when the rest of the organization is willing to go through that change with it.
And we're going to talk about that because a lot of what you do is that change management. And so I want to pick your brain there.
All right.
But going back to the question of it's process mastery if you look at it as a skill, I don't know if you would call curiosity a skill, but it sounds like a skill because you have to say, I need to know the processes that affect my job. How do they work? Why do they work? Why don't they work? How fast do they work? What are the tools, right? So I don't know if we can consider curiosity a skill, but it sounds like it would be one. It's been helpful for you in order to be successful, is to be very curious about all the processes that touch you, right?
Yeah. Curiosity is a very generic word for me because even kids are curious, right? So I in a professional life, what I do typically is asking the question that is relevant to that context is probably what I consider a definition of curiosity in this case.
Okay. Yeah. That's a good call. You have not always been a leader, a manager, a people manager, but as you transitioned into being into the leadership roles, what are some challenges that popped up that you weren't expecting? And how did you overcome it? We always just think we're just going to just slide right in and it's going to be easy, but obviously challenges happen. So what do you do to overcome rolling into being more of a leader?
So I'm blessed to have few mentors in my life over time, which started probably first or second year in my job in US. I didn't know that they were mentored until year 3 or 4, right? So as you can see, there's a pattern I'm creating here. I'm not the smartest of cookie for the first 6 to 12 months in any job. And then year 2 and 3 is when I realize what has happened is because of what they have said or how they have influenced me in learning this process. So I'm good with people in general. In general, that is something that I had as a childhood. I probably have more friends than a lot of people in my family. My parents, one of my father was like that. My grandfather was like that, right? So I learned it's built into me, into my DNA. So that's the first portion. The second portion is coming from a very male oriented culture back from India. I always thought, okay, as a manager, you tell people what to do, they will do it. That is the mindset that I came up with. So I had one of the mentors who basically said, I want you to act in that role, then I will promote you to be a manager. So basically, I had no direct reports. I have to do all the job as a manager for 10 months to prove that I can get the outcome that this person was expecting from me.
Uh,
So, and he said, I will put you under my organization for the next 10 months. And this is the two core objective that you need to deliver in this 10 months. So went through that process. And at the end of 10th month is when he moved me to be a manager. And during that process, I learned that working with cross-functional team is not about telling them what to be done. It's how to get that buy-in to something that we want to do, right? That's the very first lesson that I learned. The second lesson that I learned is even the people that work with you, you need to respect them for what you bring to the table, right? And they need to respect you for what they bring to the table. So it's a combination of how you work with them, how you treat them. So at the end of 10 months, there are two key takeaways. One is it's not about telling people what needs to be done. For sure, it's not that. The second portion is, I think if you treat human beings as human beings, I think there's a connect that will help you be successful in doing your job as well as make others being successful in doing their job. I think those are the two lessons that I learned in that 10 months. And this is one of the things that the person that made me do this job told me, you have acquired those two skill sets in the last 10 months that I could see. So you can grow into a people's manager, and you're going to make mistakes as a part of this within the first 2 years and see how you can correct that. And I will let you make the mistake to help you coach that.
That is powerful. And I've done a few podcasts now and just talking to people. There's always been these really instrumental, influential people that wanted to see you win. And I'm going to give you 10 months to figure it out. I'm going to let you stumble for the first 6 to 12 months. Like you said, your theme is it takes you about a year. In this new world of like microwave society where everything needs to happen right now, I feel like there's a lot of managers and people that are expecting people to come fully baked the day that they walk in the door. And I think that that's important for you to say that even now there's that learning curve, no matter who you are, no matter where you are. The question I have for people that are starting out in their jobs, and I think it's just a little bit different environment, maybe from IT to other places. How would you establish your credibility while you're struggling in that first 6 to 12 months? Is there certain things you're doing or saying or how you show up to make sure it's like, I'm not fully baked in yet, but give me some grace, give me some time to build up? How do you make sure that you're not getting kicked off the island in that first year?
When you work with people, the biggest thing people really care for outside of the project outcome or the deliverables is transparency in how you approach them, right? Being honest in that conversation. Because also there are, as an individual, each of us have our own principles on how we want to manage people and how we want to work with people. It can vary from one individual to other. My philosophy with the people that I work with and work for, and I support people is I tell them, if you do your job, my philosophy is you get a paycheck. If you do something above what is expected in your role, I will support you also. But I also tell people, when I tell them, if you do your job, you get a paycheck. Certain people are very good in doing their job, extremely good, but they are not motivated to take their career to the next stage. And that's totally okay. I'm not going to push that individual to say, go into the next stage, right? That's what they are good at. So why not leverage them for that role that they are brought into their organization for, right? There are certain people who say, I want to try different things so that I can increase my skill set or I can go to the next stage in my career, whatever that might be, right? So as manager, I give them opportunity where they can add something to their skill. And I tell them, keep adding it, right? That is what I learned by how do you let, if you take the analogy of a younger kids, right? On day one, they don't eat on their own. You basically have to give them over a period of time. Okay, you teach one at a time. Same thing with people. They, lot of people, you'd be surprised, want actually their manager to support them and help them, even though they may not ask because of the fear that am I going to be not given that opportunity because I asked for help. I have no inhibitions like that. Maybe that is my skill that I have no inhibitions. But I think if you come across as asking for help, you probably will be successful in doing your job most of the time.
Okay, that's fair. And it's to your point, is that transparency, that honesty from the very beginning of what you do know and what you don't know and where you need the help. All right,
Yep.
let's move on to the next segment. It's called the playbook. Let's talk more. We've been doing this a lot, but let's talk more about the strategies and kind of higher level. Now I'm going to get technical here, and this is more for our IT folks, but a core part of your job, it's to make business processes frictionless. So when you think about enterprise apps, it's all the different tools that people use to do their jobs, especially at tech companies. We want that to just be, I click a button, everything works. I don't want to think about it. So you're supposed to enable this frictionless business process. How do you do that practically? But how do you redo that job to make people feel seamless when they're clicking all these different tools?
I'm an Apple user. I use Apple. I do not know how to use a Google phone. So the way, the first few years, I thought technology solves world hunger, so I can do anything that I want to. Over a period of time, you will see a pattern. Every company wanted, or every business process that exists in an organization wants it to be simple. Nobody likes complication. If I tell you, Brian, do you want a simple process or do you want a complicated process? The answer is always simple.
Always simple.
Right? There are no exceptions to that, right? So when somebody explains me or tells me this is the problem they are trying to solve, I try to process this into what is the simplest process that can support what they are asking for. And what is the simplest technology solution that supports this simple process? That is the first thing I always look at. From there, then I identify the variations to the simple process. So that kind of helped me keep things much simpler.
Let me interrupt you there. Do you have a specific framework? Are you using process maps, the little squares and the circles and the arrows and all that? What are you specifically, literally doing in order to figure out and map out process to see that's too complicated? How do we simplify it? Is it all in your head? Is it an Excel spreadsheet? What are you doing to simplify that?
So I'll talk about the execution side of what I do. So when I was a business process analyst and after I became a manager, I basically have this philosophy, and people can do it in their notebooks, people can do it in their flowchart or whatever is comfortable with them. Have them write out the steps in the process, whether you like flowchart, whether you like the steps. And then if you put it on a white sheet of paper, you're going to realize that maybe you don't need this step. You need this step because few years ago, this company had this process which is no longer valid. You can probably eliminate 5 to 10% of this step just by writing it down and then seeing where the gaps are. Then you see how much of the steps requires a very simple tool or an automation. We don't know which one is applicable. By doing that, you're going to realize there's only 1 or 2 steps in the entire process that even makes this simple process complicated. So now you break it down. I always tell people, break down the problem into the lowest common denominator. Take your steps, take the flow chart, take your instruction, however you want to do it. You want to do it in Excel, you want to do it in a flow chart, you want to do it in a PowerPoint, you want to write it in a notepad, doesn't matter. Take that and break it into the simplest problem you are trying to solve for. You will find your answers.
And that's simple. And it's not this overcomplicated thing, the way that you break it down. It feels like it should be, but that's simple. And that's not just for IT, that's for HR, that's for customer success.
Every organization is like that. When you meet a lot of people into your organization, that I think a lot of people talk about that is this tool can solve this problem and this is the best way to solve it, right? I agree with that, right? But how many of the organization needs the best way to solve the problem? They need to solve the problem. It doesn't need to be the best way.
It needs to be the most simple, and it needs to be
It
the
needs
best.
to be the most simple way that solves the problem now. And can that tool give me the flexibility to expand when my process becomes a little bit more complicated? Can it scale over time? As long as you satisfy those two, you're okay.
Is there a lot of convincing in your role? Companies have, we need this tool, we need this thing, we need this system. Is a lot of what your role is it to say no? So, hey, we need to implement, let's say, Workday, or we need to name whatever financial planning tool and all the different tools that you have to implement. Is a lot of your job understanding that process to implement it and to make it work and saying, hey, company, I don't think this needs to happen because this is going to be too disruptive for our business? Or are you just saying that somebody tells you we need these tools and you just do it?
So early in my career, probably when I was a first-time manager, maybe for the first year and a half or so, even though I learned the business process, I didn't learn to question why I'm using that tool. I understood it, but I didn't question myself more than anybody, right? Why should I even use this tool, right? Maybe year 2 or 3 into the process, what I learned is, what are you trying to achieve out of this? What is the outcome that you want? Once you define the outcome, right? Because this becomes a very challenging task in a cross-functional initiative across the company. What could be your number one objective or outcome might not be the number one objective for the other group, which is normal. So the best way to do that is when you have this concept phase or proof of concept or ideation phase, you basically run this idea through what you think are the people potentially who might be impacted. Run this through them. Hey, we are thinking about something like this. Is this something that your organization can absorb over a period of time? We feel like there might be a potential impact. They may not have a clear impact, but raising awareness among them will make them more acceptable to what you are proposing, and the buy-in process over time becomes simple because it's not a shock and awe anymore, right? You have already prepped them, you have updated them on what this is supposed to do and what the potential outcome is. They may not be a beneficiary out of this, but they are still a participant out of that because they own one part of the process. The second thing that I also do in this kind of initiative is within each of those groups that are impacted or potential who will have an impact is identify core champions within that group and have them be my voice of reasoning, have them be the champion within that team.
Let me stop you there real quick because you're figuring out the process, you're getting buy-in, you're finding your core champions, and you're like, hey, we're thinking about using this tool. If after all of that work, that pre-work to figure all this out, you're like, this is going to cause too much trouble. I'm not getting enough champions. I'm not getting enough buy-in. Have you ever gone back to your company or to the business or to the leader or to your manager? A lot of times for you, it's the C-level or your CEO and said, no, we can't do this. Do you go back after doing all that pre-work to say, no, this is not the right move? Do you have the chutzpah to say that?
I've done it in the last 3 of the 4 companies that I worked for. And basically, when I go and ask for, so once again, right, this goes back to, I am asking them for help. I'm not escalating anybody or any specific group or anything, right? I said, hey, in the overall process, these are the groups that are impacted. These groups are okay with me going through this process, but there are 1 or 2 groups which I understand there's nothing in it for them to buy into this process. But in order for us to achieve the outcome that we need, I need their help and support to make this successful. But before that, I would have already reached out to the individual process owner. I would have gone to their group set and have that conversation saying that this is what it is. It's not an escalation, uh, making them aware where I am stuck. Basically, I am at a roadblock right now. In order for me to move forward, or in your own terms, I need to remove the friction. Then I go and ask for help to the C-level executive and say, how can this, if the C-level says, is that, let's delay it by 3 months, maybe that's an option. Or let's not worry about it because the outcome is not worth this big of a change management across the organization. These are the options. But when I go to them, I also give them, this is the preferred path. If I have to make a decision today, this is the path I will take. And that kind of makes, once again, it's taking the complex thing and making it simple so that the execs, their job is not to manage me or my project. Their job is to make decisions so that we can move this forward. So if you present them the options, it's always better to have a multiple choice than writing an essay in an exam because you can choose A or B. So I tell them, these are the options. These are the pros and cons of it. But how do we want to proceed? And my recommendation is this. That keeps making quick decisions. That also helps getting the buy-in from the people who are the most impacted or who feels the importance of the problem, but cannot commit time or resources to that problem. So that kind of bridges that gap.
What I want listeners to take away from this is in the past 5 to 10 minutes, you've really broken down something that happens in Silicon Valley and big companies is we use these words, scale, and it sounds really big and massive, like this complicated word. The other thing is this change management, and it sounds like this big, scary word, but really you broke it down to know the process, get the right people involved, communicate it out. It's really that simple. It's not this grandiose thing, that scary monster. It's making things simple, making sure the right people know, change management. Now you're great at it, but just not skipping those steps because you're scared to bring people in the process or you don't know who to talk to. You really broke that down really simply, and I love that. Let me also double click on one other thing we talked about. There's been apps that you've said, no, this is too disruptive or this is not going to be helpful. What would you say, is there a foundational technology or some technologies that every business must have and they have to prioritize to make sure they can scale effectively? Are there just some that you can't say no to, and if you don't have them, go get them right now?
Yeah, I think there are a few technologies that at least I have come across in my professional career, which becomes the fabric of your organization. One is a standardized sales system, right? The second one is a standardized financial system. And then, of course, the analytics reporting side of it is the third portion. Of course, there's the HR portion of it. Like if you take the so-called decent HR system, a decent sales system, and a decent financial system, those should be your minimum that things that constitutes your technology fabric. Without that, I think you're going to struggle. You will also realize that you're going to do a lot of rework over time if you don't standardize on that. Because if any of those things are not scalable over time, you end up replumbing a lot of the stuff, which becomes actually very expensive over time. It might not be expensive today, but 5 years down the line, it becomes a costly mistake. In IT terms, we call it technical debt.
And that's the reason why we were trying to start Mamba HR, because it's, for some reason in the HR world, I've seen this a lot where it's, the wheel's been invented, but for some reason we want to keep all of the work and the knowledge that we know that this is what companies need to be successful. These are the processes, even in the HR world, that can make everybody's lives easier. But everybody does it on their own terms. It feels like it's more about ego. It's more about, I got to do this on my own. And so with Mamba HR, we want to build a tool that's just no nonsense. So you can have that visibility and not repeating processes and wasting a bunch of time and not making about ego. On the HR track, are there other things that HR can do? This is a big question as well. What can HR do better as far as tools or approaches that could help leaders be better and companies be better? Are there some things we can do better in HR?
I will answer the question in a very complicated way for you. This is one question, I will answer it in a complicated way. I've been very fortunate to have almost in every company, HR has been so great with the process that we are in alignment with them. But what I also learned as a part of the HR is I like HR/IT to an autonomous group within their organization, because that is a lot of sensitive data that HR deals with. I don't think anybody should have access to that outside of HR. It's too much of sensitive data. So that is one area where HR, IT rolling into an IT organization, I personally would not recommend it, because you have too much access to information, especially knowing personal information about employees, right? That being said, I think that's one thing that I have not seen so far is, and I've probably seen in maybe 2 companies, is where the HR analytical reporting, which is a changing metrics in every company. Only 2 companies that I know of, at least based on my experience, they have got this to a science from day one, which is amazing. A lot of people struggle with that.
How did that happen? Was there just a strong HR leader that knew what they needed to build, or was it?
Strong HR leader. They exactly know what they want, how they want it, and they basically said, this is what I'm trying to get out of. And I think great HR leaders, the 2 companies that I was part of, had 2 great HR leaders who are like, this is where I want to be 5 years from now. How do I get there? And they started it in year 1. And they didn't take any shortcuts towards.
Specifically, are you saying Tableau dashboards to get the information out faster, or what are we saying? What do you need?
Any dashboard, right? It could be a Google Looker dashboard. For me, once you have the data, presentation layer doesn't matter. I probably can do it in an Excel spreadsheet also, not a big deal. But so I'm not going to take the tool side of it. But what metrics I am trying to get out of that is the key thing, right? I think that's something. I'll tell you a good example in these 2 leaders that I found. The attrition rate across region is something.
Yes.
Those are the only 2 leaders I have seen even project that number.
Which that is insane to not have that information. It's like driving with shades over your eyes, right?
So they do have attrition. There's an attrition ratio that they project, but so some of the attrition is very cultural, specific to that region also. That's something that it's amazing. So the best portion of that is, if the attrition is over 2% within a group, then the leadership team talks about it in both those companies.
Yeah.
Which is
so not just the data, it's what do you do when it hits a certain threshold, or when you see this. It's not just reading and be like, cool, thanks for the info. It's there's something else that happens once you get that data. That is the
right.
Good call.
I've never seen companies which take attrition data and then try to take corrective action within a quarter to get back on the right path, which I think is amazing.
Was that something, do you think, that they pre-built the playbook that says, here's the metrics we need. If the metric gets past X, Y, and Z threshold, then we do X, Y, and Z?
I think it's a pre-thought out thing in both the examples that I am aware of. They know they want to track attrition, which is an important. Then they put a process and system in place over a period of time to get to that. They didn't get it on day 1. Okay. They were trying to do this manually and see how they can even manually collect it. They spent 3 to 6 months doing this manually. And eventually by probably month 15 or 18, they exactly understood what that meant. So because they were trying to work through the nuances of what am I missing? What am I not missing? Or am I doing something too complicated that maybe I don't even need this? So they ran through this for 3 to 4 quarters before they arrived at that number.
That's really good to think about. And so anybody watching, especially in HR, let's do better at the playbooks that we have to help deliver that. That's a good call. Let's move on in the interest of time to the next segment. This is game day rituals. What are your day-to-day habits? You have quite a bit on your plate, and you've always had quite a bit on your plate. And so I really want to know, how do you keep yourself sane? How do you prioritize all the different things that are coming at you personally, professionally? all the demands and stay effective? I try to use AI for everything. I use my calendar for everything. I use time boxing. What do you do to make sure you're managing all your competing priorities?
So let me start how my day looks like typically. This is what I've been doing for the last 9 years right now. Prior to that, I cannot remember. So that's the only reason I'm not going to answer. I'm a early morning person. I wake up at 5 o'clock daily. Then the first 1 hour is my time. So I watch stock market, I watch Sports Center, I watch YouTube, completely not even connected to anything work related. I don't even look at my phone, right?
Okay.
I go all around. So if you sit next to me, you will be very irritated because every 3 minutes I'll be flipping channels or changing. That's one. Probably hour and a half into that, I figure out what is the one thing I have to do today. It's necessary to do today. That's one thing that I will always prioritize. Everything else is a second priority for me. That's one thing I have to accomplish today. And that will be the only thing I will look at. The rest of the other activities that I come across, right? When I am driving to work or when I am at work or when I grab my coffee, I think about who can I ask help for, who can I delegate it to that can get this job done. And then once I figure it out, probably will accomplish. So whatever needs to be done. And if you have more than one thing that you have to do daily from a priority standpoint, you definitely need to work on how to manage your priorities. Typically on a given day, you will get one priority that you need to stay focused on. If you have multiple priorities, either you have not done your job the previous day or you are not aligned on your priorities. Very few times you get into a situation, then you will end up working extra hours to get close of that, which is fun. Once or twice that has happened to me, but not all the time. But most of the time, if there's only one thing you have to do, is probably what I will pick that and say, this is what I'm going to focus my energy on for today.
Okay, so you're prioritizing and you're ruthlessly prioritizing your day. Is it a week at a time, a month at a time? How far out do you go when you're scheduling and prioritizing and planning?
So typically the monthly, weekly activities, your group normally knows what they are going after. So I let them manage through that and come to me only for if they need my help. So once my project is aligned and it's set, the project team takes over at that point in time. What I need to worry about is, do I need to manage any escalations? That is an outcome of this, right? Or is there any new thing that's coming up 6 months from now that I need to focus on? I might be in a conversation. They said, hey, we want to do something next year for this. I don't need to solve it that day, but I need to know when I need to start talking about it. So typically, on the day-to-day activity, I let my team manage it. My concept of one-on-one with my team is very simple. I tell my team, I will set up the one-on-one, but it's up to you to ask me whatever questions you want to. My job is to only listen and actually give you that time is for you to ask any questions that you want to. I don't have an agenda.
What if somebody does not manage that well? Do you help craft that better for them?
Yeah, so I basically, if there is no agenda, I set up the meeting. I basically said, if there's any project topics that I want to discuss, that will be one of the agenda item. And the second item is whatever you have in your mind is my agenda item. So project things, I will ask them. I just get their opinion of in their mind, is the project going as they expected? Is there any red flags that I need to be aware of that may not be tied to that individual, but overall they see something that nobody has brought to my attention? So once you go through that, it helps me manage any failure points or any escalations better over time. So that is how I keep my one-on-ones typically. I said it's for them to ask me questions.
Are there other habits, other tools, other must-haves that you use practically on a day-to-day basis to stay ahead?
What I also do, one of the things that I learned in a hard way is to gain knowledge about what's happening in the industry, right? Weekly once, I roughly keep around 3 to 4 hours trying to do networking across my peers or podcasts or something that helps me take my focus off the daily grind. It's almost like my watching ESPNs and stock markets and podcasts and YouTubes. I try to talk to other people to see how they are doing, what do they come across, especially during when you do the yearly budget. That comes in very handy because they have a different, you can compare what you are trying to project with the peers in the industry so that you know how much you are on target or how much you are off. So that kind of conversation, I try to block 3 to 4 hours in a week. It could be for a coffee, it could be lunch, or it could just be casual phone conversation when I'm driving back and forth from work.
Let's move on to one strong level up piece of advice. What's one failure that really changed, was pivotal in your experience? Was there a failure that still sticks to your mind that changed and made you better? What'd you learn from that? How'd you get across it?
I always thought for the first almost 8 to 10 years in my professional career, there is always a perfect job and there is always a perfect role. I went in with a preconceived notion for all the companies that I worked during that time. And later in my career, when I became a manager, right, I actually realized there is no perfect job, right? The role is what you make out of it. The moment I have that mindset, right, a title doesn't mean anything to me anymore. And if a role says do A, B, most of the time we just don't do A and B. We probably do few other things. So that made me think, so the role is just a guideline more than anything. So there's no perfect role.
Yeah.
So it's what you make out of it. So that is one failure early in my career, because when I was trying to look for new opportunities, I said, this is the perfect job definition that I will apply for. Maybe I lost a few more opportunities in a better job than what I was because of that mindset.
Yeah.
So that is something that I always tell younger people now. The role is something that you can shape up what it needs to be. If you have the right mindset and if the organization has the structure to help you get there, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Right now, the role says A, but what this could evolve into over time could be very different.
It always ends up happening. That's a good call. Last one on the advice, and then we're going to go right into our 2-minute drill and wrap this up. If you could go back in time and share one piece of advice with your younger self, what would it be?
Don't try to find the perfect job.
Okay. Don't get stuck there.
Don't get stuck there. Don't ever get stuck there. The job is perfect on how you make it, how you do it, how you work with the organization, and what role you come in as, and how you shape up that role. Everything else is secondary.
Good call. That's very, very on point. That makes sense too. All right, let's close this up. This is the 2-minute drill. We're at the very end of this podcast. Once again, Bali, this has been amazing so far. Quick question, quick answer, rapid fire. We do this for all of our different podcast guests. And just to be clear, I'm stealing everybody's info so I can be better. So this is super helpful. All right. What is one IT skill everyone should master?
Problem solving.
A book every tech professional needs to read.
I will answer this in a different way. I don't read books, but what I do is I watch a lot of inspirational videos. If somebody wants to learn about management and what your job role is, there is a YouTube video about New England Patriots 2014, do your job.
Yeah.
That's something that people should look at if you understand football, of course.
Brady was my favorite, still is my favorite. So I actually, I know exactly what you're talking about, and that's it. Do the work, be in the arena. A favorite life motto or piece of advice, is it do your job?
Yep.
That's easy. All right. Last one. What's a hidden talent or a surprising skill that nobody knows about that you use outside of IT?
One hidden talent. For the last 4 years, roughly around 20 weeks in a year, we cook food for 250 to 500 people every Saturday.
Every Saturday.
Every Saturday. Sorry, 20 weeks in a 52-week year, we cook food for 250 to 500 people. And I cook part of a non-profit team that actually cook food for shelters, cook food for people who come for specific events. And we cook in freezing cold in November and December with no socks, just plain, and it's for 500 people.
What nonprofit is that? Just so if anybody else is interested?
It's an Indian temple. So we help support some of the events at the temple. So we basically cook for 250 to 500 people in freezing cold weather. No socks, no sandals, nothing.
Wow. I would not have ever guessed that, but that is incredible. But that's the reason why I'm always amazed by you every single day. All right, Bali, this has been extremely helpful for me. I think all the people that will end up watching this, there's a ton, and I'll have a bunch of different clips because there's so much that we were able to pull from this. As always, Bali, I thank you. You're amazing. I'm grateful that we're friends. I'm grateful that we were connected. I appreciate you. And for those who are watching, this has been hopefully very informational for you. This is the Level Up Career Playbook Podcast. I'm Brian Bell. This was Bali. This has been great. See everybody next time. Have a good one.
Hi, Brian. Nice talking to you.